Hey humans, it's Hannah. Welcome back to my channel, or if you're new here, I do videos on creepy and disturbing things. Today we're talking about Lacey Ellen Fletcher. This was a video that my patrons actually voted on over there. So the lack of information about who Lacey Ellen Fletcher was as a person is very tragic in itself. But the way that she would pass away in the most deplorable conditions you can possibly imagine is more tragic than anything. We're going to talk about how Lacey Ellen Fletcher was found by authorities on a couch that she had been sitting on for 12 years straight, at least. So let's talk about what I could find about Lacey Ellen Fletcher first. By the few accounts that I could find, neighbors said that she was a fun, normal kid. She liked volleyball, she liked country music and Disney movies. She was, quote, smart as hell, according to the neighbor's son. She moved into the house that she would spend the rest of her life in Slaughter, Louisiana, at about 9 years old, and she made friends in the neighborhood like any normal kid would. However, when Lacey was in the 9th grade, she would start to be homeschooled. She was around 14 at this time, and it was just like when she got homeschooled, that was about the time where she became super isolated from other people, and people just saw less and less of her. You see, Lacey was autistic, and she also had very extreme social anxiety. This seemed to get worse as she got older, which may have been one of the reasons she started homeschooling. So like I said, people saw very little of Lacey after she started to become homeschooled. However, the last time anybody outside of her parents would see her was when she was 21 years old, and she was outside of the house exercising, like I think just walking down the street exercising with light weights. So she was outside of the house, but not far from her house, and this is when a neighbor spotted her. She was 21 years old, and that's the last time that we know of that anybody outside of the house has seen her. But after that incident, she just kind of disappeared. Like, the neighbors stopped seeing her altogether. Lacey's mother, who was named Sheila, was a police and court clerk for the small city of Baker nearby. More recently, before her daughter's death, though, she became an assistant to the city prosecutor of Zachary. She was also on Slaughter's board of aldermen. Clay, who was Lacey's father, was an official for the nonprofit company Baton Rouge Civil War Roundtable. The two of them were very well liked in the community. They went to church every single Sunday and otherwise just blended in with the neighborhood. So the neighbor that saw her when she was 21 years old was 59-year-old Robert Blades. At one point, he was chatting with Clay, just like making small talk as neighbors, and he did ask Clay where Lacey was. However, Lacey being an adult, Robert assumed that he was going to tell her that, oh, Lacey moved out, she went to school, she got married, or she has a family of her own now even. But Clay's response was weird. He just told Robert that Lacey was still living there with them and that she was still living in the house, and then he very quickly changed the subject, and that was it. There was nothing else suspicious going on, though. The neighbor had no reason not to believe him and probably just assumed that he happened not to see Lacey on the few times that she did go out. He probably knew something was odd about her, and I don't mean odd as in autistic, but the social anxiety preventing her from going out. He probably knew that something was off, so he just assumed that she stayed in the house most of the time, and that when she did go out, he just didn't happen to catch it. Like, that makes sense. I go years without seeing any of my neighbors too. And again, no one thought anything of it because the parents were very well liked in the community, and there was nothing strange, no other red flags. But that all changed on January 3rd, 2022, when Sheila, Lacey's mom, called 911 to report that her 36-year-old daughter was not breathing. Something important to note, this is the neighbor, Robert Blades. This is his account. So again, take it with a grain of salt because it's kind of a he said, she said situation. But he said that there was a neighbor, a different neighbor at the house when Sheila called 911, and that Sheila would not have called 911 probably if the neighbor wasn't there to tell her to call 911. So it was like under that social pressure that Sheila called emergency services to begin with. Again, grain of salt, I have no idea how true. None of us will really know exactly what went down, you know? Okay. So now we're going to talk about how Laceys body was found. I already know that this video is pretty much going to get demonetized, which is understandable, but it's going to get demonetized because I'm about to tell you the details in which her body was found. So I will put a timestamp on the screen if you wish to skip the details. I mean, and you can just get along with the story knowing that she passed away. But just huge trigger warning for the next part. It's upsetting. The details are graphic and just like one of the most messed up things you'll ever hear. So Laceys' cause of death was due to quote unquote severe medical neglect. Lacey was found literally fused to the living room couch. A hole where she had been sitting for at least the past 12 years was completely filled with her urine and feces. The upholstery and cushion were completely worn through. Lacey was found with her feet crossed underneath her, and she was wearing only a t-shirt and nothing else. Lacey was found at only 96 pounds, which goes without saying means she was extremely emaciated and starving. Her body also tested positive for COVID-19, which is curious because the only contact she had with the outside world was her parents. So it's possible, but just a little odd. So she was chronically malnourished, had acute starvation, she was immobile, she had acute ulcer formations that went all the way through to her bones, osteomyelitis, which means she had a bone infection as well. With all that, she had feces spread all over her face, her abdomen, and her chest. Her hair, of course, was all matted up, and parts of her body were covered in maggots. Almost every report mentions that detail, but I am very unclear on whether that was because she passed away and her body had been there for a while, but I believe it's implied that she was kind of infested with bugs before she passed. All of these things together, of course, led to sepsis, which is not surprising whatsoever. What's surprising is that she made it that long, honestly. And her parents hadn't taken her to any doctor since she was 16 years old. She was 36 when she died. There was apparently a video that showed the entire crime scene, and I believe Laceys body was in this videotape, and this was shown to the grand jury as evidence. They had medics on standby right there to help out in case anybody in the grand jury had some sort of, I'm guessing, panic attack or medical emergency due to having to view this videotape and the whole crime scene. Like, if that gives you any indication of just how bad this was. So Sheila and Clay were both charged with second-degree murder in May of 2022. Not manslaughter, but the more severe charge of second-degree murder. It is possible the max sentence, they could get life without parole if they were to be convicted of this. I doubt that they'll get that harsh of a sentence if they are found guilty, but that's what they're facing. Both of them made bail though within 36 hours of being arrested. I assume because in spite of what they have or haven't done, they are still seen like not a menace to society. Like they're obviously not a danger to random people. I mean, that's speculation on my part, but that's what I'm guessing. Their bond was set at $300,000 each. They used a bondsman to help them pay the 12%, which would have been $72,000 for both of them. Then in July of 2022, both Sheila and Clay pled not guilty. So they're going to trial. What the real discussion is are they guilty or not? And I have some thoughts. So first of all, let's talk about their side of the story because we do need all angles of this. According to Sheila and Clay, they told investigators that their daughter was autistic and she suffered from very severe social anxiety to the point where she refused to leave the house. This severe social anxiety got very, very bad in her early 20s when she disappeared. And they said that she was so afraid that she was afraid to even leave the sofa. They claim that they did try to get her help, and they tried to physically move her from the sofa to basically drag her to get help, but Lacey had a total freak out and refused to move. Sheila claimed that Lacey never complained about the sores that developed all over her body, and even said that she cleaned them for her frequently. I have a hard time believing that, considering she was found covered in her own shit. She had a bone infections and sores were literally eating away at her flesh, but whatever, that's her story. According to the parents though, their defense is that Lacey was an adult. She did have the ability to move away from the sofa. She could have made her own decisions, etc., but she simply refused to move, so they just let her stay there. Before I go into my thoughts and, you know, all of this, keep in mind that her parents have not been convicted of a crime yet. They are going to go to trial. They pled not guilty, so all of this is alleged. But if I were to tell you my opinion, I would say that their story just does not add up to me. My personal opinion is something that we see a lot in caretakers for disabled people, that they're just seen as too high maintenance and they just don't want to take care of them anymore. Instead of getting help, which they could have gotten for her, they could have brought people in to help Lacey, they just left her there. And I'm sorry, but so much of this story and the way they found her just does not match up with what they claim. I want to just bring up the fact that it is very, very common for disabled people to be obviously not only treated different in our society, but they are more vulnerable to crimes in general. And I've talked about this before on my channel, but then we see this phenomenon where caretakers of disabled people are often pitied when they're abusive or when they kill the disabled person in their care. It's like people are sympathetic for the caregiver, and the caregiver will play that whole thing up and be like, I just couldn't take it. And people often like almost have this weird feeling sorry for them and like almost this weird understanding of why they would harm or even kill the disabled person in their care. Like, that's not, I mean, I'm not making this up, that's a thing. First of all, in my opinion, we are conditioned as a society to pity those that are sick or those that are disabled. We make this huge ableist assumption as able-bodied people that are disabled could not possibly be living a happy life, which is just inherently not true. Just because somebody's different than you or does stuff a different way, they might be living a very, very happy life, a happier life than most people. As we know, people in the disability community have spouses, children, are often very independent, etc., etc., etc. And so when a caretaker kills a disabled person in their care, we don't see it as like a regular murder as we should. Unless all the reports about this story, unless the photos and the autopsy and all that is somehow completely inaccurate, I cannot see how this was anything other than Sheila and Clay showing severe neglect for Lacey, who was in their care and had disabilities. Unless something wild comes out about how what we know so far was completely inaccurate, I don't know how this wasn't Sheila and Clay's fault and how they weren't showing severe neglect towards their daughter. There's just no way in hell that she was sitting on the couch in her own filth like that, literally melting into the couch and rotting away, and they were just looking at her and being like, she doesn't want to get up. She's happy like that. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, with this, I also need to talk about locked-in syndrome. There is a lot of sources out there as well that claim that Lacey had locked-in syndrome. Locked-in syndrome is probably one of the scariest things I've ever heard of. This is a condition, a very rare condition, where the person who's diagnosed with it, their body becomes completely paralyzed except for their eyes. Their eyes can make vertical movements, and that's literally it. They cannot do anything else. Their entire body is paralyzed. However, in spite of that, they are still conscious and fully aware of everything going on. They didn't lose any brain function. So some of these sources are claiming that Lacey not only refused to move from the couch, but that she had locked-in syndrome, so she couldn't. But I read in another source that this was actually a rumor and that it was not true, true, and we have no idea where this information or where this rumor started. So it's not proven that she had anything other than autism and social anxiety. To me, it would not make any sense for her to have locked-in syndrome as these rumors claim. As far as I am aware, on my research on it, if you have locked-in syndrome, you cannot eat or drink. So they have to insert a tube. For people with this syndrome, they insert a tube directly into their stomach in order to get them food and water. Lacey, if you recall, hadn't seen a doctor since she was 16 years old, and she hadn't gotten any medical care. Obviously, she would not have survived 12 years on the couch if she had locked-in syndrome, because she wouldn't have been able to eat or drink. Just so much about this story just doesn't add up. It's weird, and it's hard to find like solid sources on this as well. My best guess is that Lacey's parents' report about Lacey refusing to move was partially true. I can totally see that, depending on the severity of her autism and also if she had such bad social anxiety that it was full on very severe agoraphobia and she was only felt safe on the couch. I could see that. But if your disabled child is deteriorating in front of your eyes and you don't do anything to help her and just claim that there was nothing you could do. I mean, you could have called authorities to come in and force her. You could have brought in a therapist, brought in other stuff, cleaned up her area at least. We know Sheila worked for the police department at one time. She couldn't have gone to any of them for help. Like I said, it's all just weird and it all just doesn't add up. And I don't want to just like take it easy on Sheila and Clay, as this was their daughter and she was in their care and they could have done something to help her. It's just, yeah, this story just makes me sick, and I really hope that they get to the bottom of what really happened and that Lacey can actually get some justice. All right, guys, that is going to be it for today. If you're interested in helping me pick some of these topics on my Patreon, I will link that down right below this video. There's other extra perks on there. We do monthly Netflix parties together with me. I create a whole extra uncensored video each month for mid-tiers and above. You get early ad-free access and lots of other stuff. So go check it out, and I will see you all in the next video. Speaking of patrons, thank you to all of them on the screen now. Top tiers are Colin Holmes, The Deck of Cards, Michelle Valdovinos, Tom L., JJ, Little Kittle Cat, Mitchell Schaefer-Meyer, Mike, Alice Paul, Brittany Phillips, Willow Winchester, Bambi, Momo Neon, Philip J, Marita 144, Sage K, Literally Lacey, Elderly Hipster, Reese Rolls, Leon James, The Puppy Hag, Rebecca Jackson, Headless Fancy, Toby, Carter, Kawakan Anime and Gaming Convention, Sonder, Sarah the Crazy Fish Lady, Blood for the Koi, Larkrar, Maxie, Ashley Danielle, and Give Grammy a Kiss.